I want to pray
So
قيام
we are
الليل.
live. We are live right now. So
Can I ask a
yeah,
question?
that's
I want to pray قيام الليل. So is hearing this lecture part of قيام الليل?
so it is part of طلب العلم, but قيام الليل is more of a ritual than actually sitting and listening to a lecture. So if you're talking about قيام الليل to mean basically doing a particular ritual like prayer and engaging in prayer, that's what is called qiyam al-layl. So let's say you're doing istighfar throughout the night. That's not qiyam al-layl, but that's doing istighfar throughout the night. Okay. And of course, the ayat and the hadith do praise those that engage in spiritual activity in general, whether we're speaking about doing istighfar throughout the night or doing deep ponderance in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's creation throughout the night, or whether you're listening to a lecture throughout the night. So all that would be something that was praised, but it is not in particular fitting within the category of what is called qiyamul layl, because that's a specific ritual of doing a specific prayer, tahajjud or qiyam al-layl, or certainly praying at night. Okay, so to answer that question. Okay, so
Assalamu
everyone,
alaikum.
inshallah, we will be talking about a couple things, even though we did already do and finish tayammum, but I thought it would be good because the last time we had talked about this was before Ramadan. So that's pretty much almost a month and a half, if not an actual month and a half. And I thought it would be good to just go over it really quick. So, and then probably get to where we're supposed to be at. So tayammum, or of course, the word that they used was dry ablution. But when we're talking about tayammum, okay, what are we really talking about? So we're actually talking about when water is scarce, basically, or in other words, the absence of water, or water is available, but you're not allowed to use water, not necessarily by somebody telling you you're not allowed to, but you can see one, whether it's a medical reason, when perhaps by using water, your body is probably slowing down in its health process, or whether if you were to use water, that is to regress at least the health stage or the health status on you, etc., then in that situation, even though you have water, but you would not have to use water in order to consider yourself that, okay, I'm performing my ritual right, because in that situation, if it involves one, the scarcity of water, two, if water is available, but it is harmful for you to use, or you're not capable of using it, then in that situation, you would still have to engage in ritual, let's call it purification. And then in that situation, if you're not able to use water, then you would use something else. And let's talk about what that something else is. How are we going to do that? So that's what we're going to talk about, inshallah. So the first evidence for that, of course, well, that's the question always. What's the evidence that in cases where I do have water or I don't have water and I wanted to engage in purification, what is the alternative, and what does the ayat, or what do the ayat actually say about that? And what does the ayat? So here's the ayat that basically acts the most important evidence in regards to tayammum, and the ayat goes as follows: يا أيها الذين آمنوا إذا قمتم إلى الصلاة فاغسلوا وجوهكم وأيديكم إلى المرافق وامسحوا برؤوسكم وأرجلكم إلى الكعبين وإن كنتم جنبا فاطهروا. وإن كنتم مرضى أو على سفر أو جاء أحد منكم من الغائط أو لامستم النساء فلم تجدوا ماء فتيمموا صعيدا طيبا فامسحوا بوجوهكم وأيديكم منه ما يريد الله ليجعل عليكم من حرج ولكن يريد ليطهركم وليتم نعمته عليكم لعلكم تشكرون. That's pretty straightforward. Let's see. Oh, you who believe, when you rise to perform prayer, wash your faces and your forearms to the elbow, wipe over your heads and wash your feet and the ankles. And if you're in a state of janaba, which basically is reaching the sexual climax, or basically having whether it's an actual stimulation or whether that was an actual sexual intercourse, then purify yourselves. But if you are ill or on a journey, or one of you comes from the place of relieving himself, or you have contacted women and do not find water. Okay, so here we go. It says basically you don't find water, then seek clean earth and wipe over your face, hands with it. Allah does not intend to make it difficult for you, but He intends to purify you and complete His favor upon you. Okay, so what are we looking at? You don't find water, then seek clean earth. What is the word for it in Lugha Arabiya? Right there. If you don't find water, then what is the word in Lugha Arabiya? فَلَمْ تَجِدُوا مَاءً فَتَيَمَّمُوا صَعِيدًا طَيِّبًا. So in Lugha Arabiya was basically noting for us and telling us what you are supposed to be doing in cases when we're speaking about whether it's a minor impurity or a major impurity, and you don't find water, then your alternative would basically be pretty simple. You're going to be looking for sa'idan tayyiba. So what is the word sa'id anyways? The word sa'id basically means anything that surfaces the earth, anything that basically goes beyond the earth, but that would actually be what we would consider as soil. Okay, so what makes soil? So whether we're speaking about soil, we're speaking about sand. Some scholars added stones, pebbles, rocks, etc. So consider that would be what would be considered as soil. So basically, you can use that in order to make wudu. And certainly for Madhab al-Shafi'i, they actually used an easier description, or at least an easy description. I shouldn't be calling it easier, but an easy description to what actually describes that Sa'idan Tayyiba, and they basically described it as the substance on earth that is not affected by fire. Okay, that does not get affected by fire. In fact, it turns off fire. It's kind of I don't know how they thought about it, but that's actually a great way of putting it. So what is tayyamum? Tayyamum basically means to have the intention to do something, and tayyamum in basically the context or the technical term within Islam is basically to wipe the face, to wipe the arms or the hands. I shouldn't say arms, but I should say the hands, and using soil or the substance that we talked about, basically whether we're speaking about sand, we're speaking about soil, regardless of what type it is, what type, whether it's red soil or whether it's orange, whatever it is, or black, whatever. At the end, it's basically what surfaces the earth, or whether, according to some scholars, are using whether you're using pebbles, rocks, etc., that would certainly be included in it as well. Okay, so then in that situation, when we're speaking about them,
do you know which ayah this is from?
Yes, ma'am. So that ayah is basically right there in Surah Al-Ma'idah, ayah number 6.
Okay, Jazakallah khair.
Right. وإياكم. So, of course, there's a certain in a specific way of how we would do tayammum. So you could see here it said in Arabic, it means to have the intention. Legally, meaning, well, I wouldn't say legally. I would actually be saying technically and within the Islamic terms, it means wiping over the face, the hands with clean earth in a specific way. That specific way is basically involving how the Prophet ﷺ taught us that tayammum is done. Okay. And therefore, you could see that the ayah was actually using the word tayammum in itself. Okay. Let's see. So is there a hadith that also supports this interpretation that we had basically canonized in fiqh? So yes, certainly. There is a hadith, and this hadith you could see is in a Sahihain, which basically is another term to say that this was narrated in Bukhari and Muslim. So when you see two Sahih, the word Sahih actually means authentic. So it's talking about the two most authentic references for hadith, and that basically is Bukhari and Muslim. In other words, they're authentic hadiths. They're not needing any research for you to do and see whether this is authentic or not. Just by having it in these two sahihs or one of them, that would actually tell you it's an authentic hadith, and you don't have to do any research to verify its authenticity. Okay, let's see the hadith. The Prophet ﷺ said, أُعْطِيتُ خَمْسًا لَمْ يُعْطَهُنَّ أَحَدٌ قَبْلِي نُصِرْتُ بِالرُّعْبِ مَسِيرَةَ شَهْرٍ وَجُعِلَتْ لِيَ الْأَرْضُ مَسْجِدًا وَطَهُورًا فَأَيُّمَا رَجُلٍ من أمتي أدركته الصلاة فليصلي. So the Prophet ﷺ said, I've been granted by Allah 5 things which were not granted to anyone else before me. And they are, Allah made me victorious by awe. In other words, by even by fighting, by frightening his enemies, all right, from a distance of a journey, a month's journey. So even if there's no battle, people are just afraid. And people, I guess the notion and all those stereotypical images of Muslims being scary and etc. actually comes right there to suit, I guess, to suit the Muslim power, even when the Muslims don't even need to engage in any battle, but people will consider their distance and consider, I guess, the honor of Muslims in that situation. Okay. The second one, which is the place of what we are concerned about in our place of research, the earth has been made for me and for my followers a masjid. So the earth itself, in other words, you don't have to be in a designated place to pray, but you can actually pray anywhere on earth. And in fact, it is a mosque and a clean place for prayer. In other words, basically gives you the space and it gives you the tools for you to use in order to get purified, to get close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and to perform the rituals. And of course, that's basically to say a means of purification. So any one of my followers can pray anywhere, whenever the time of prayer is due. So you could see that this hadith made it clear that what is mentioned or what was actually noted right there, فَتَيَمَّمُوا صَعِيدًا طَيِّبًا. You could see that this hadith basically explained that it's all about basically the earth itself, or al-ard itself, the earth itself, basically being the substance to use to make wudu. So tayammum is an alternative in that situation. It's a substitute for purification when water is basically one is not able to use it, or the person is basically not supposed to be using it, or they're unable to use it, whether not available or unable to use it, meaning they're not healthy or they're not capable of getting that water. Okay, so that one was clear. Okay, so what are the situations and the cases when tayammum would basically be an alternative, a substitute for purification? Number one, in situations when water is not available. So when water is not available, you can't find water, you're probably maybe at home, but maybe just like the people in Gaza, they're at home, or at least let's say they could be in a tent or something, but then there's no water, or they're on a journey and there's a scarcity of water. Maybe perhaps on a ship, but then there's not amount of water, although you are seeing basically the water probably all around you, but then you're probably not capable of getting that water. Maybe it's too far down, or perhaps hey, your captain told you that they don't have enough pure water, or at least unsalty water, and certainly drinking salty water can really put your life at risk. So this area right there, and do not find water, then seek earth. So basically making it very clear and straightforward. If you don't have water, then you could seek earth. Number two, if the person did have water, but it was basically insufficient. So it's not having enough water, perhaps for drinking, cooking, and other necessities, then in that situation, the person can consider the survival as basically their priority right now, and therefore using water, or at least tayammum. Basically, we're speaking about tayammum right now. So in situations where there is availability of water, but it's not enough for survival, then in that situation, the person can do tayammum. Okay, let's see the last one, or not last, what? Probability of harm, and such as whether we're speaking about due to an illness, or probably if it is delaying the recovery, the one's recovery, or perhaps something of that sort. Now, it's really important to mention that in order to consider something as harmful on your body, it doesn't have to be a doctor's prescription, but you could consider your own experience. And looking at your own experience, you've tried using water before, it basically made your health regress, or probably slowing down the process of your healing, then in that situation, you can consider using tayammum, even though you didn't necessarily have a doctor's note in that. Okay, so if let's say you had eczema and you notice that probably your skin is cracking more, it's getting drier due to the usage of water, even though you tried to pat dry it, you tried to use different methods, perhaps using medications, etc., but you notice that it's getting worse every time that I would be using water. So can I make tayammum instead of using water? Certainly. Let's say you were having cracking feet and your skin was too dry, and every single time you would do wudu, even though you tried wearing socks, but let's just assume that yes, I would wear socks, but if I were to wear socks, my feet would be feeling too warm and it feels like burning. So therefore, I wasn't able to take the alternative in wiping over the socks because my feet would be burning badly. So in that situation, I would say, well, you could do tayammum on that specific area that you're not capable of washing, and let's say at least the probability of harm in that situation. Inability to use water due to illness. So we're speaking about the water is available and plenty of water, but basically that illness is preventing the person from moving to get the water. There's no one to help them probably perform wudu, so they're basically afraid that they might miss the prayer. So what happens? Yeah, you're probably in the hospital, or maybe, Ya Rabbi, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Ya Rabbi, give us all good health and be able to perform what we need on our own without the assistance of others. Allahumma ameen, Allahumma ameen, Allahumma ameen. There's nothing like you performing your own needs, whether it's going to the bathroom, getting your own food, getting your water, needing whatever is to help you basically move on and survive. There's nothing like your own power. There's nothing like your own self in assisting yourself. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, ya Rabbi, give you the ability and give you all good health to always be able to give yourself what is needed to keep you going. Okay. So in situations where the person is basically having an abundance of water, but they're not capable of probably moving, whether due to an illness or old age, or perhaps they're in a hospital, but they're ringing that alarm bell to get the nurses come and give them assistance. But of course, they're probably on call. They didn't come. Asr time's almost done, and I can't do it without their help. So I'm right there bedridden. And in that situation, I don't want to lose my asr. So in that situation, you can do tayammum. But how am I going to do tayammum when I'm probably bedridden, and even to turn left and right, I can't even turn left and right, or even remove probably the different machinery to help me do tayammum? Then in that situation, we would say, well, pray as is if you're not able to do anything. The fear of catching cold, when we're speaking about fear and catching cold, it's not just necessarily cold. So if the person basically had water, but if they were to use that water that is basically room temperature or perhaps cold water, and they didn't have the means to probably heat that water, and if they were to use cold water, perhaps they might get sick. And I had seen cases where frequent showering for some people, even if it's hot water, in other words, the right temperature, frequent showering probably gets them sick and gets them maybe having a cold. Then in that situation, those times they could use tayammum. Okay, so yes, it can be based on a person's experience to determine whether this does get them ill. So of course, sometimes people can recognize their body and how it basically reacts with the world outside, and how it basically has probably a certain low immune system or different things that their body is reacting differently to. So in that situation, you can consider your experience, and you can consider in situations like this, you can consider your, let's call it your gut feeling at that moment in order to keep you healthy and to keep you basically safe. Okay, so if we had basically considered that the person is one of the aforementioned cases, they can be as one of the people in the category that we had mentioned. So can and would they be permitted to do tayammum? And of course, basically, well, how is that done? So a couple things to say before we move on. Number one is that don't be lenient in saying, well, yeah, I've got my experience and I'm going to go for tayammum and etc. You really have to consider taking the fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and you have to be really certain, let's say it that way, and not just wanting to look for easier solutions. Okay, now the ayah generally says, and do not kill yourselves, although the context was actually in the situation of jihad, but it's still, when we would look at the ayat, العبرة بعموم اللفظ لا بخصوص السبب. When we're looking at the theme in the ayat, it doesn't have to be based on the context it was revealed in, but we could look and quote the wording, even though it was probably revealed in a different context. But the ayat is pretty straightforward that suicide, or whether it's a direct suicide, somebody jumping off the cliff or jumping off, who knows, a 12-story building, or whether we're speaking about a person engaging in what we would know would result in probably the deterioration of somebody's health, or perhaps maybe getting them ill. In that situation, that would be considered within this category. Do not kill yourselves. In other words, do not inflict harm on yourselves. Okay, so in situations when, of course, probably wiping over the bandage or the wound, if it doesn't hurt or harm probably the bandage or the wound itself, then in that situation, the person is capable of wiping on it. So the person's capable of wiping on that particular is capable of wiping on that bandage, for example, and doing tayammum basically for the area that they're not allowed to use water on. So what are they doing tayammum on? Well, they're doing tayammum for that actual bandage, basically. If they're capable of using water, just a little bit amount of water, and wiping on it, then that should suffice. If not, they're not allowed to use water on that, for example, bandage or cast. And in that situation, they can use tayammum on that area. Okay, let's see. Is it permissible to perform tayammum with basically clean earth, sand, basically just earthy stuff? And according to the preponderant, just give me a second. Okay. So according to of course, when we're speaking about well, what substance are we talking? We had mentioned before that the general term of seeking صعيدا طيبا, which basically literally means anything that surfaces the earth that is pure. So if you're capable of seeing on that earth, for example, that there was probably dog droppings, or probably some impurity on it, then don't use that water, and make sure, don't use that earth that's basically impure as to what you could see. And in that situation, you would basically seek an earth that is pure to the best of what you could see, the best of your knowledge. Okay, and how did the Prophet ﷺ actually do tayammum? So how is tayammum performed? And in that situation, we would basically just simply say all you need to do is you would gather that soil and you would open up your fingers. So in other words, your palm, you would open it up and then basically strike over that. It can be just a tablespoon that you probably put on paper. You probably have maybe a utensil. You've got a tablespoon of soil. That's all you need. You don't need to get a whole bucket of soil. It can be just a tablespoon, and just put it on it and just strike your hands. You open up, stretch out your fingers, your palm right there, strike over basically once over that soil, and then you're going to get it out. So you're not going to leave that soil. The idea is not to collect soil on your hand. So you don't have to feel that, oh, I'm going to be grabbing the soil and basically starting to rub it against my face. No, that's not what you're doing. You're not rubbing the soil against your face. You're basically putting your hands over that soil and dusting it off your hands, and just gently, so you're not fully dusting it off, gently, so you're basically just gently dusting it off your hands, not literally dusting it off, but you're just basically giving your hand a little shake just to let all those things come off, and then wiping your face first with that basically palm of yours, and then you're doing it again. You're basically striking again against that earth, and with that strike, which is basically the second strike. Now you're basically wiping your palm basically from the actual palm and then the back of your palm, and we're speaking about the right side and we're speaking about the left side. Okay, so you're letting your left hand basically wipe your right hand, whether we're speaking about the palm and the back of your hand, and then of course your right hand is wiping your palm and then the back of your hand. Do you have to reach all the way to the elbow? The answer is no. It's enough to basically do the actual palm, and that's basically it. Okay, so the other thing is, well, what nullifies tayammum? So if we're talking about doing tayammum, what would nullify it? And therefore, I would basically have to redo my tayammum. So number one, just in general, whatever nullifies wudu, or whatever nullifies and basically puts you in a minor impurity, or whether puts you in a major impurity, and we talked about that before, and the definitions of major and minor impurity, and in other words, whether that puts you in a situation that you would have to make wudu or ghusl, the complete shower. Tayammum would be an alternative to it. So maybe to mention a story, one Sahabi wanted to do his little analogy. Okay, so he thought, okay, if wudu is an alternative and a substitute for tayammum, if tayammum is an alternative and a substitute for tayammum, oh dear. If tayammum is an alternative for wudu, so he thought what I could do in a major impurity is basically dive in the soil, literally dive in. So he literally dived in the soil and just basically got the soil all over his body, because he thought that if the minor impurity would require that I would wipe my face and in palms, then the major impurity would require that I would have to wipe all my body against the soil, and he basically dived into the sand. Well, that's not actually accurate. The Prophet ﷺ, when Ammar ibn Yasir, who's the Sahabi that basically went through this and performed all of this, he had explained to the Prophet ﷺ what he had basically considered in his analogy, and the Prophet ﷺ explained to him that it was and it would have been basically efficient and enough to basically just do the tayammum, and which is wiping the face and the hands. And it's important to keep in mind when we're speaking about wiping the face and the hands, remember the ayah itself. It basically was telling us, فَامْسَحُوا بِوُجُوهِكُمْ وَأَيْدِيكُمْ مِنْ. The ayah was pretty straightforward and basically said, well, then wipe your faces and your hands with it. And that's basically to let us know that tayammum is pretty straightforward and basically simple. Okay, so what would nullify it is basically whatever that nullifies wudu, or whatever that brings the minor impurity or major impurity. So in that situation, when does that actually stop? That would basically stop in a situation when, of course, the person, whether we're talking about the reason why they were using that tayammum. So whether it's because they had healed, or whether now the water is available, or of course, certainly they're able to use it, they had enough, etc. So in other words, the reason that was there, giving them the right to use wudu as an alternative, to use tayammum, sorry, as an alternative to wudu, since the reason is not available or it's not existent anymore, then in that situation you cannot use tayammum. Question: what if I had already prayed dhuhr, okay? And then I basically, when I prayed dhuhr, as an example, okay, when I prayed dhuhr, I didn't have water at the time, whether it's not have water, or basically I was falling within the 6 categories. Were they 6 or 5? Basically the 5 categories, I was one of those. And then I basically had prayed my dhuhr, but then let's just say the reason, let's just give an example here just for the sake of the argument, okay? And let's say that I wasn't capable of doing wudu because I didn't have enough water. So let's say then my friend comes over and brings water to, so when I prayed dhuhr, I didn't have enough water, but then my friend comes over and basically brings lots and lots of water and many gallons of water, etc. Or probably, let's say the water started running again before they were doing probably some they were working on the pipes and whatever it is, but then the water started working, but I had already prayed dhuhr, okay? Do I have to redo my dhuhr since there's enough time and Asr did not start yet? Do I have to redo my dhuhr, or is it enough to consider that I had prayed already using tayammum? That's a place of differences of opinions between scholars. Some scholars actually said, since now and there's enough time for you to do the prayer, then in that situation, since you had gotten the water, someone brought you water, or the water started running back again, and there's enough time for you to redo it, then in that situation, you must redo it, according to the first opinion. The second opinion basically said, well, you had already performed the salah. You shouldn't be performing it a second time because that was considered as valid at that time due to the certain circumstances that basically had fallen at that time, so you don't have to do it. Okay, so what is the preponderant? The preponderant, wallahu alam, is that you do have to redo it because that water was certainly when that water was not available and you had done tayammum, but right now we still have enough time, and tahara is a requirement, and therefore, right now, you've got the substance ready. This is the preponderant, but if somebody else gave you a different preponderant, that's okay too. Okay, if same thing if, of course, whether we're speaking about the reason is basically gone, or you probably healed magically. I don't know how you can heal that fast. I mean, it can happen, right? It can happen. Okay. Can't think of a scenario, to be honest, but in the end, hey, now we know. Of course, it's important to take in the different rulings. إذا أمرتكم بأمر فأتوا منه ما استطعتم. The Prophet ﷺ said, if I ordered you on any matter, then do as much as you're capable of doing. So that's just a simple thing to say right there. So here's this. Why don't we do, since we finished that tayammum, let's do like a 2-minute break, just a 2-minute break, and inshallah come back for the removal of impurity. Got a lot to cover, so stay tuned, inshallah. Just a 2-minute break, inshallah. All right, my friends. So we are back, inshallah. So now when we're speaking about removal of impurity, and it's important to mention, of course, we had talked about this before, numerous times. When we're speaking about impurity, we're actually talking about Islam telling us that impurity itself affects your faith. Impurity affects your mind. Impurity affects your health. Impurity affects your spirituality. Impurity basically affects your mental health, physical health, and certainly your relationship even with others. Okay, so when we're speaking about affecting your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the ayah was pretty straightforward in telling us, يا أيها المدثر قم فأنذر وربك فكبر وثيابك فطهر. In order to be a person on a mission, to be a person that basically is on a mission to Jannah, or whether on a mission to delivering the legacy of the prophets, you basically have to be one. رَبَّكَ فَكَبِّرْ. You have to glorify your Lord Almighty. You have to have your tawheed in place. And وَثِيَابَكَ فَطَهِّرْ. And the second one is basically embracing purification at all times, whether we're speaking about garment according to this ayah, or whether we're speaking about body, or whether we're speaking about place. So three things: body, garment, and place must all be pure. So pure from what? Basically pure from the different impurities that we had talked about before. Okay, and the Prophet ﷺ had ordered the woman that basically was inquiring about the constant bleeding that she was getting. The Prophet ﷺ told her, and purify your clothing. In other words, basically purify, the ayah was saying, and purify your clothing. But the Prophet ﷺ was teaching that Sahabiya to basically purify the clothing and don't worry about the stain that is left behind. And this was actually in the context when she was asking and inquiring about menstrual bleeding, or even the bleeding that is outside of menstrual right there. But she was probably, who knows, she had some kind of an illness that made her get continuous bleeding at all times. Okay, so in general, of course, in fiqh, always the first chapter is basically the chapter of purification. So removing any impurity is considered a main thing within Islam. So we're speaking about not an extra thing, but we're speaking about a center in a Muslim's life, in the Muslim's life. Okay, there we go. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically directed us. Where do we find this substance to purify ourselves with? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَيُنَزِّلُ عَلَيْكُم مِّنَ السَّمَاءِ مَاءً لِيُطَهِّرَكُم بِهِ. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sends down rain from the skies in order to give you the purification. So that's basically a straightforward word to basically tell us that purification comes from the rainwater in particular, or whether we're speaking about rain, clean water from probably rivers, or perhaps the different things that you would see all around you, in terms of all around you meaning let's call it organic water. Okay, so what are the things that we're supposed to be removing the impurities off of? So whether we're speaking about floor, or the things that are such as walls, whatever it is, all those different things, you would basically use that to remove the impurity by washing it once. So let's say, for example, you had an impurity, all right, that you had an impurity probably on your floor. Maybe mother was changing her baby's diapers and basically, of course, does a number one right there and splashes it. What am I going to do in that situation? Let's say it was on the countertop. Let's say it was on the floor, sorry, to basically, be, I guess, really graphic in that situation. May sound disgusting for the girls that had never had any children, but for mothers, they know that this will inevitably happen once in their lifetime at least. It will for sure happen. Okay, especially boys, so we know that one. So, okay, so what am I supposed to be doing in this situation? It's enough to basically do a one-time washing for that area and basically just give an enough amount of water and just let it. Basically, you're probably using a squeegee, probably using something to then remove that. In other words, we're using something which is water, and then we're using something to remove that water and remove the substance that was impure along with it, and probably getting the place dry. But let's say we're speaking about something that probably has an actual substance. So we're talking about perhaps maybe did a number 2, it's a baby potty training, but then the potty training just goes next to whatever the child is supposed to be learning how to potty train in. And of course, right there, does a number 2. What am I going to do? You're basically going to remove that substance, and then you're going to remove it, whether we're speaking about water, and certainly you're removing the remaining substance and making sure that it's not there anymore. You don't necessarily have to use Clorox wipes or any of those wipes and bleach and all of that stuff. If you were to use water, yes, definitely, using some soap is probably a better idea because it's basically cleaner. You could definitely tell the difference in the smell, so definitely cleaner. All right, but do you necessarily have to use that? It's enough to remove the impurity and by basically using water. Can I just use wipes, like let's say the wet ones, baby wipes or whatever it is? So in general, we're supposed to be using what would remove the impurity in a good amount of water. Using wipes is not enough to remove that, unless that was the only thing that you had. Okay. What about things like rainwater? Let's say it was on, let's say on the driveway, in my driveway right there, and that's where the najasa and the impurity happened. And then basically rainwater just came there and just came on it, cleaned the area, and perhaps, yeah, sunshine later on, and everything is fine. Can I just pray on my driveway? I mean, I don't know why you would want to pray on your driveway, but you probably had a barbecue on that day and couldn't go inside. That's absolutely fine. You can consider it as clean, even though you remember a couple days ago, your baby basically, who was getting the potty training, basically did a number 1 and number 2 in that area. But hey, now we don't say it. Okay. Okay, what if the impurity, maybe we could just remove, let's see, right there, clear all the drawings. Okay, what if the impurity was not on let's call it a dried or a solid surface? If it's a solid surface, well, it's a solid surface, then in that situation, it didn't absorb the najasa. What if it was?
Can I ask you a question? Sorry.
Go ahead, Nora.
Am I allowed to do that?
You're allowed to ask a question. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead. Even
Okay.
though,
Because this is totally applicable, okay?
all right,
Because
fair.
my parents came over and they brought their dog. I they know I don't want that. But oh my God, they used one of the bowls for to feed the dog, and I couldn't keep it. Wallah, I couldn't. And
Okay. So
yeah.
I'm gonna talk about the details, Nora. Just give me a second, inshallah. I'm going to take it one category at a time, and you're
Okay,
gonna
Jazakallah khair.
right. So when we're looking at the substances to remove the najasa, we're talking about one solid substance and it would just need washing it once. But if we're speaking about substances that might actually absorb the najasa, let's say a couch, let's say your bed, mattress, etc. So that's something that would absorb the impurity. So in that situation, what you're going to do, you're going to get like something like a dry towel or a dried cloth or whatever it is, and you're basically going to basically press on that surface that was the surface that basically absorbed the impurity, and now you're going to basically reverse the whole absorbance, and you're going to let that dry towel now reverse the absorbance, and right now absorb the impurity. You're going to pour water again, and you're going to get that dry towel basically to reverse the absorbance, and you're going to let it basically absorb it, let's say reversibly. Okay, you're going to pour water and then right there reverse that absorbance and do it a couple times until, to the best of your evaluation, to the best of your understanding, or you know that this is enough, and right now nothing of that impurity remains. Okay, so basically we're talking about two substances. Number one, a dry substance or a solid substance, and we're talking about a substance that may absorb those najasat. Now, the other thing is, of course, we're speaking about, let's see, am I on the right spot right there? I'm just making sure that, okay, we're on the right thing. Okay, so here we go. They basically said, well, squeezable things, then in that situation, you definitely want to use, if something had absorbed the substance and you're capable of squeezing it out, then definitely do so, or reverse basically the absorbance in that situation. And if it's an unsqueezable thing, so if we're talking about perhaps leather, you can't squeeze it. You can squeeze all you want, but it won't actually be doing the same type of effort and the same type of impact that you would basically have on something that is probably like fabric. Okay, the things that can neither be overturned, if we're talking about basically heavy objects and etc. I can't, let's just say it's a really heavy table or something that is big in that situation. Okay, you're not capable of probably, maybe, let's say we're speaking about, let's say, a very expensive wood, okay, and you didn't want to put water on it. So in that situation, can you, let's say, use those wipes a couple times, and just to make sure the whole object is to remove the remains of impurity. That's the whole object. So if you're capable of removing that impurity by doing multiple wipes, then in that situation, if we basically got to we got to the object of it, which is removing the impurity, then that should suffice. Okay, and let's see. And of course, what if I couldn't locate the area? Okay, what if I couldn't locate? I just know that for sure there was a number one that was done on the couch, whether it's my cat, let's say a cat, or perhaps the boy that's potty training, or the girl. I don't know why I have to consider a boy, but I guess I think girls do a better job in potty training than boys. I don't know why, but yeah, maybe that's my experience. Actually, my boy was actually faster. He potty trained in one day. One of my boys potty trained in one day.
One day?
One day.
Oh my God.
He just did 14 accidents on that day. Did not use any of that pull-up or anything like that. Just one
14?
day. 14
Boy,
accidents.
that must have been a horrible day for you. Sorry.
It was a horrible day, but you know what? I was like, that's it. Just basically got him off, and I was like, he's going to understand what this means, and did not use any of those diapers. Just put it on underwear. I'm like, yeah, here it is. Here's your underwear. work your way, figure out how this whole body functions, and then he just did 14 accidents. He was capable of understanding what is going to happen. So right away, he knew what this means. Second day, he's all done. He's all clean. He knows the whole system and how it works. That's it. It was it. That was the fastest one. Okay, and let's see, what if the impurity was basically from a different thing? So if we're talking about, am I actually doing, hold on, let me see. I want to make sure that the Arabi is equivalent to the English side. Okay, and let's see, let me see.
I was wondering if you're actually going Arabic English, but thank you. Allah made you answer without me asking. Keep going.
Yeah, no, I'm basically pretty much doing the same thing. So here we go. It's basically giving me the same Arabic and the same English right there. So yeah. Okay. Here we go. This is it. Okay. And okay. Now, as for the impurity, if we're talking about impurity, okay, such as related to caused by dogs or swine. Well, let me just comment on the word swine for a little bit. Scholars actually had differences of opinions on whether we're speaking about pigs, whether they would take the same ruling as dogs or not. There were differences of opinions. The preponderant is when it's in relationship to dogs, okay, when it's in a relationship to dogs, it doesn't take the same ruling, and dogs have a specific ruling, and that's basically what was mentioned in the hadith right there. What is the hadith saying? The hadith is pretty straightforward in relationship to dogs, and basically said, إِذَا وَلَغَ الْكَلْبُ فِي إِنَاءِ أَحَدِكُمْ فَلْيَغْسِلْهُ سَبْعًا أُولَاهُنَّ بِالتُّرَابِ. If the dog basically licks the utensil or any utensil, in that situation, you're going to wash it 7 times, but one of those 7 times, you're basically going to be using soil. So what does that mean, using soil? You're going to be getting soil and basically putting that soil or basically putting soil inside your utensil, kind of, basically circulating it around, then dumping it, and then you can use water after that. Or you could use it, it doesn't matter when you want to use soil, just make sure you're washing it 7 times, and one of those times it's basically going to be using soil. So you could see this hadith is narrated by Muslim, basically telling us that this is an indication that this is an authentic hadith. So whether we're speaking, now here's one thing. Some scholars actually considered that this is exclusive, okay, to utensils. Why? Because the hadith goes as follows. When a dog licks a utensil belonging to any one of you, let him wash it 7 times, the first time with earth, or the first of them, or at least one of them to be with earth. So some scholars, they considered that this isn't exclusive to a utensil. In other words, some scholars literally said, if, let's say, a dog licks your white garment, I don't know, your white wedding dress, and basically, according to those scholars, you would still have to use soil in one of them and wash it basically 7 times or 6 times, washing it and washing it or basically wiping it with that soil as one of those basically 7 times. Okay. So according to some scholars, you would have to consider this hygiene process not only to utensils, but anything. So whether we're speaking about it's your white wedding dress, or whether we're speaking about perhaps a utensil, or whether we're speaking about your musalli or whatever it is, or whether we're basically speaking about your hand. Okay. So if the dog licks your hand, according to some scholars, you would have to use this 7 rule. Let's call it 7 rule, and that you would have to apply it on your hand, on your skin, on your garment, or whether we're speaking about a utensil. Other scholars, they considered that no, the hadith was straightforward. This is talking about a utensil, and therefore this is to avoid sharing the different, basically, contaminants, the different things that the dog had left behind, and therefore this is the proper hygiene. Once you clean it and using that 7 rule, then you're capable of basically using it. Now, should I, like the example that Noura said, well, my family, they brought their dog with them, and unfortunately they just got any utensil, and it happens to be one of my favorite utensils, but I was too disgusted to use it again. I mean, if you were just too disgusted just because, hey, you just didn't like that, it just, just made you disgusted, well, I mean, that's up to you, but Islamically, it's permissible to just use the 7 rule. But if you still feel disgusted and you didn't want to just use the 7 rule and just, bring back that utensil in your kitchen, I mean, that's up to you, but it's permissible Islamically. Now, some scholars actually considered, well, this isn't exclusive to dogs, but this is also things like pigs, for example. If, let's say, you were going on a farm and this farmer basically had pigs on one area, and of course these pigs wanted to jump into their mud pie or mud puddle or whatever it is and make their own mud pies, and of course it happens to be on your expense, and here you go, and you were just walking past them, and boom, that pig basically jumps, and all that mud basically is basically on you now. And who knows, maybe that farmer let the pigs loose on that day, and you were there just wanting to do your udhiyah, but then the pigs basically start following you, licking you. As much as you screamed, it didn't work, but then yeah, that's what happened. It happens. Okay, so scholars actually had the same differences of opinions. Is this exclusive to dogs, or is this not exclusive to dogs, which is the 7 rule? Okay, the preponderant is that it is exclusive to dogs and not including pigs. Okay, not including pigs, because when we're looking at impurities, we're seeing, for example, we're not going to use the 7 rule if we were to talk about urine, or the 7 rule if we were to talk about, for example, feces or blood or whatever, but we're seeing that the hadith was really exclusive to making the 7 rule hygiene to only dogs, then therefore that's a very specific thing. To use the 7 rule on other things would definitely mean that we would have to stretch out the hadith to perhaps more than just pigs. Then we would have to stretch out that 7 rule to probably the other impurities as well. And we know that the Prophet ﷺ didn't do it that way. Okay, so how
So
about
it's only dog? So it's only dog, the 7 rule?
It's only dogs. The 7 rule, the preponderant is only related to dogs, only the 7 rule. Okay. But like I said, is it exclusive to utensils, or is it inclusive to any substance that the dog licks, whether it's your white wedding dress or I don't know what it is, but is it inclusive to that as well? Differences of opinions. Okay, now washing those areas. We talked about the things that are, well, items that are basically squeezable. You would have to squeeze whatever was basically absorbed by those items, then in that situation, you would need to squeeze it, and it's not enough to just pour water over it. In other words, you're not just diluting that amount of najasa, but you are absorbing using a dry cloth or a dry piece of garment or whatever it is, okay, towel, basically to reverse that that absorbance, okay. And for the things we've talked about these, so let's, pass it. All right. So what if I don't know exactly where this impurity is? So you're basically going to consider the best of your the best of your, I guess, your thought. Where would this be at? Just, try guessing and try doing your best and in that situation. Okay. If you still couldn't figure out where it is, then in that situation, wash the whole thing just to be sure. Okay. If you just know it's somewhere on this couch. Okay. If you have a specific area, then wash the specific area. Let's say we're talking about the couch had, let's say, 4 panels. Okay. But you just know it's somewhere on this big panel. Okay. Then in that situation, you're not really sure exactly where to locate it, then wash at least that big panel that you basically are certain that it was there on this big panel, but I couldn't locate it exactly. Okay, then you're going to wash that big panel and not necessarily the whole thing, because the whole object is to make sure that the place is pure. And if you're able to locate it in one side, then do that side. All right, so what about boys? Okay, boys are different than girls, and the ruling relating to boys' urine. We're not talking about any boy, we're talking about infant boys that are not on solids. Okay, infant boys that are not on solids, basically. Okay, and if they were to urinate, so these boys, they're basically getting nursed. They're not on solids. They're not eating anything. And what happens to their urine? So there is a hadith where the Prophet ﷺ, Qais basically came with her baby, okay, and he was not on any solids. Okay, didn't even start eating ordinary foods and solids. She took him to the Prophet ﷺ, made him sit on his lap, but guess what happened? The baby basically did a number 1 on the Prophet ﷺ's garment. And then the Prophet ﷺ just asked for water to sprinkle over the soiled area without washing it. Okay, now if the child is old enough to basically consume solids, okay, even if they're still nursing, but they're old enough to consume solids, so we're talking about 6 months and above, okay, then their urine is regarded as the grown-ups, okay, and basically needs to be removed just like the older ones. Now, a couple things to say here. Number 1, some scholars consider that this is not exclusive to boys. And number 2, they considered that are we talking about formula here included? Okay, now those 2 areas, differences of opinions between scholars. The preponderant is girls' urine is not included in this, only boys' urine is included. There was actually a scientific study that was done by Dr. Salah al-Salih, rahimahullah, in regards to the difference between a boy's urine and a girl's urine. And we're speaking about baby, of course. We're not talking about any boy and any girl. We're talking about infant boys that are nursing, not on solids, and that's the type of urine we're talking about, okay? And the girl's urine is basically different than the boy's urine, and in fact, it's more complex than boy's urine, and even with the substance, whether uric acid, the different acids, the different types of pH, etc. The girls basically have it differently. This is not related to misogyny from early childhood. No, this is basically relating to hygiene and Allah ya'lamu man khalaqa wa huwa al-latif al-khabir. Okay, so did some scholars also say that female urine, baby girls basically included? Yes, some scholars did actually say that too. Why did I say the preponderant ruling? One, because the hadith was talking about al-ghulam, talking about a boy, and it didn't say girl. And number two, you had majority of the scholars actually say it was specifically speaking about boys. And number three, the scientific evidence that basically speaks about certain things developing in a girl's body, even from infancy, that are different from basically the boys' urine. In other words, the anatomy is different, and certainly even what functions in both of their bodies is completely different. Okay. The other question is there a difference between formula and nursing? Differences of opinions between scholars. Some scholars actually consider this is exclusive to, let's call it, organic milk / breast milk, and therefore whether we're speaking about the mother pumping the milk or whether she's literally nursing him directly, that's let's call it organic milk. And therefore, some scholars considered that this is exclusive to that. Other scholars basically considered it's not exclusive to breast milk, but this is also including formula, because formula is basically, or milk itself, it itself is not a solid. So therefore, the scholars that considered that this includes formula milk, they considered that it's the baby's body producing basically at certain stages of that baby's development, and that's basically what relates to it. So it's not what the baby is consuming in terms of milk and what type of milk, but this is relating to the body and that boy's body and its development. So that's regarding the development and not necessarily looking at the substance, okay, and not looking at the substance that the baby is basically feeding on in terms of formula or breast milk. What is the breast? What is the breast? What is the best? Sorry. What is the best opinion here? The preponderant ruling? To be honest, I don't know. It's always definitely best to stay on the safe side. And wallahu a'lam, the safe side is to consider this is more exclusive to breast milk than actually formula as well. And subhanallah, as a mother and as a woman that used to run a daycare, I would say, I don't know if this, this is definitely anecdotal, but I would tell you that the smell of babies' urine and their basically their poop, if they're going on formula, it really smells different, completely different than breast milk. So I don't know. I don't know how to explain it. Maybe, somebody that probably is specialized in, I don't know, biochemistry, or I don't know what field, or maybe pathology, can explain this to me. But, we still don't know, is there an evidence or a correlation between impurity and smell? Well, generally, yes. There is a correlation between impurity and smell. That's why the Prophet ﷺ was teaching us, for example, whether it's passing wind or whether it's basically the different substances that are around you, was teaching us that there's a correlation between a foul smell and impurity, between foul smell and hygiene, and we basically know that. So I don't know if if that would pass. Fiqh, from the fiqh standpoint, that doesn't pass as evidence. Okay, just a note. My experience does not pass as evidence to prove that that's that's impure. Okay, I'm just just a note that I guess my gut feeling, but that's not how we would research fiqh, and that's not an evidence. So if you basically come across a study, definitely share it, and I would be happy to learn more. Okay, let's see right there. 3 kinds of impure objects. Major impure objects, whether we're talking about like dogs licking something, and there's minor impure objects, but such as basically urine, basically from infants, so that makes it a minor, and moderate. So we're talking about all other substances. Okay, let's see. And okay, what about other impurities? We're speaking about other impurities such as basically animal droppings or cow dung. Animals, I don't know if dung would actually include other than cows, but what about their urine? So let's say a person works on a farm, and of course you'll have dogs, animals, different types of animals, etc. So what would be the ruling in their on their droppings that relate to probably their urine, etc. So number 1, we're going to classify the animals based on whether we eat their flesh or not. Okay, so if we eat their flesh, then their urine and their droppings or their dung is basically going to be considered as pure. So things like camel, cows, and basically goats, we eat those. Well, herbivores in general. Okay, herbivores in general, they're basically their droppings. Well, when we're speaking about their droppings, or whether we're speaking about urine, now one thing to note, there are some scholars that considered that the animals, even if we eat their flesh, their urine is not necessarily pure. Okay, and considered that the only pure urine, or the only urine that we have evidence to consider it as pure, is basically camel urine. And there's a story behind that, there's the story of al-Uraniyin, basically. We'll talk about that later, but they were using camel urine. Okay, using camel urine as basically a substance of remedy. It's, I guess, their own homeopath, but is that really true? But I guess with their experience, I'm not a specialist here, but I know that there is a Saudi doctor. She had done research just on camel urine and also their milk. She was just doing these, I think it was actually published in scientific and medical journals. So it would be really interesting if you could find it. But I just know for a fact that the Saudi doctor actually did this research just on camel urine, and also there was another research that was done on specific types of fats that relate to, believe it was camels as well. Don't take my word for that, but on that one. Okay, so the Prophet ﷺ, when we're speaking about urine, is it every animal that we would eat their flesh, or at least we're permitted to eat their flesh / herbivores? Does that mean that their urine and their droppings are basically pure? Okay. First opinion, yes. Second opinion, the urine the pure urine is only exclusive to camels, and not cows and not other herbivores. Okay. Third opinion, basically considered that when we're speaking about the animal sweat, we're then talking about looking at its flesh and saying, well, if it's flesh we eat, then its sweat is what we eat, but considered that droppings in general we're permitted to use as fertilizers, we're permitted to use not in food. So definitely, those spices that you would get from India, don't eat that. Okay. Don't use it and I mean, yeah, cow dung, no, it's not food. Okay. But anyhow, is it permissible? Is it considered as pure? It's considered pure, but not every pure thing you would go eat it. Okay. All right. Let's continue right there. So what's the evidence that this was actually considering it as pure? So let's see. There is a story that a man comes to the Prophet ﷺ, and this story is actually in the Sahih, meaning either Sahih al-Bukhari or Sahih Muslim. All right. And the Sahabi asked, "Anusalli fi marabid al-ghanam?" Can we pray in the area that basically the areas, I don't know if they call it a barn. I don't know if that's called the barn, but basically the barn, I'll just use the word barn to mean the home for those sheep. Okay. I don't know if it's called a barn, but you know what I'm talking about. And in those barns, basically, of course, the sheep, the goats, they're basically going to be doing number one and number two. Okay. Can we pray in those? You can. But the Prophet ﷺ, when he was asked whether we're permitted to pray in the barns where camels are kept in, the Prophet ﷺ said no. So why say no for the camels' barns, but not say no to the sheep barn, even though we eat both of their flesh? Okay. Be really interesting to also do a study and really see in terms of tahara. Is it tahara related or is it jinn related? What is the relationship? Allahu alam. We don't actually know. So what about things that basically we eat their flesh? Okay, we eat their flesh, but then let's say, I guess I live on a farm and this sheep basically drinks from the same utensil. We used to have, it was like a pottery thing. It was a huge thing. And usually we had something on top of it. That was when we used to live on a ranch. Okay, something on top of it and then a rock over it just to make sure that nothing goes in there. But it can happen that maybe, especially goats, that they might actually be daring and figures things out. Goats are really smart and they're completely different than sheep, and they'll figure themselves out. They will do things that would really impress you. You would not think an animal would know how to do that. Okay. But let's say this goat drank from the water and ate from the food that I'm basically eating from. Can I still consume it? If we're speaking about from an Islamic perspective, the answer is yes. Is this something that you would want to do? Well, that's your preference. That's your personal choice. Well, what about cats? Of course, cats, it can be a a really, I guess, tricky thing. Number one is that cats, although carnivores, but they're not impure. Why not? So the Prophet ﷺ, had said, إِنَّهَا مِنَ الطَّوَافِينَ عَلَيْكُمْ وَالطَّوَافَاتِ, because they're the ones that are tawafin. Tawafin means that they would frequently go around, they would frequently basically live around you. So and plus they would basically cleanse themselves, certainly, by licking themselves, but, it's quite, strange. I can't help but every time I would see the cat basically licking him, I just can't help but think, well, what does the hairball, and don't they get any hairs in their tongues? What happens there? But yeah, thank God I'm not a cat. Okay. All right. Well, in relationship to cats, what if my cat basically drank from the same utensil that I drank from? I mean, if it's your preference, you don't want to drink after what the cat had drunk from, well, that's your preference. But Islamically, it is considered as permissible. Okay, so that's called the su'r. Su'r is when, let's say, somebody drinks something and then basically the water that is left behind. Okay. And certainly we know that the cats basically are carnivores. We don't eat their flesh, and certainly their urine and their droppings are basically impure. Yes, definitely. So I guess do the potty training for your cat and figure that one out. Okay, so and of course, when we're speaking about tahara, remember the Prophet ﷺ said, "At-tahuru shatrul iman." Purification is basically half the faith. So taking that in consideration is definitely a serious matter, because that will lead to firming your faith. I did, and I was hoping to start menstruation rulings and postnatal bleeding. If you ladies are okay with starting that, I mean, I don't mind, but it is going to take easy, like almost an hour. So if you prefer, we could get a good amount of time next week. So, and leave right now, I guess, the questions and Q&A right now. Let's see. Can we blow on palms before wiping instead of shaking them? So the sunnah is to shake it and not blow it. What about urine on carpet or on a sofa, or that can't be washed? So we talked about that. You're going to use something to basically reverse the absorbance. And yeah, so here she's talking about the stables, meaning basically the goat stables. Is that what it's called? So yeah, well, thanks for educating me. All right, if there are any other questions, or you would like to unmute yourselves and ask the questions, whether related, let's start with the related to the topic, and then after that, inshallah, we'll look into the questions that are not related to the topic. That's okay too. Okay, let's first talk about the questions that are related to the topic. Zamzam, go ahead, dear.
Everything except camel is what I learned.
Everything except camel, what? What about
The
that?
impurities from the camel is safe, but everything else, cat or the other animals.
Well, you want to remember that we cannot pray in their barns or stables. I don't know what it's called.
So the barns, even if you put a musalla, you cannot pray there.
I don't know why you're putting a musalla in a camel's barn, but yeah, you cannot have a musalla in a camel's barn.
Okay, got it.
You guys have camels a lot in Kenya?
No, I had one by the ocean. I used to pay $3 every day. My mom almost kicked me out of Kenya. They're very big animals, Dr. Aisha, by the way. I'll send you a picture of me on a
The camels, you mean?
I was so shocked. I never thought they're like 9 foot tall. They're very big animals.
Oh, no, I know. When I was a young girl, we lived on a ranch, and I still remember this So basically almost 14-year-old boy, and he had almost 7 or 8 camels, and he was like their shepherd, and he would come by, and I remember, yeah, the camels that, yes, not all breeds are very tall, but yes, they can be very tall. So I'm familiar with them. And familiar, of course, because lived on a ranch, so familiar with goats, familiar with sheep, familiar with cows, horses, and rabbits, chickens, etc. So these things, yeah, familiar with a lot of these domesticated animals. Maryam, go ahead.
Hear me now?
Maryam, go ahead, dear. Maryam, we heard you say something, and then you stayed quiet. Oh dear, Maryam has an issue with her microphone. That's okay. You can type it in the chat, dear.
I
No,
sent a
no,
picture of
it's
Miss Hamid.
oh, sorry.
Sorry.
There you go. Now we can hear you, dear. Go ahead.
I said if someone has a question before me, they can, so like, because it's related to like a few weeks ago. So
Okay.
yeah,
That's all right. That's all right. That's okay. It's
can I
okay.
ask it?
Go. Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Okay, so a few weeks ago you said like when you do wudu on your head, you wipe until the back and you come back. And I was wondering, like, as like you tie your hair behind, like I used to do that, which is like to wipe. I don't go back in the front because my hair are tied and I don't want to mess them up. So I wanted to know like if this is allowed or like I should really go back and forth.
Okay. So number one, differences of opinions between scholars on the amount of wiping the head. Okay. Is it 1/4? Is it 1/3? Is it three, the amount of 3 hairs? Okay. So the sunnah is basically from back to front. Okay. Back to front. And what if you were to do front to back and then come back again? That's also permissible as well. But in general, we're speaking about wiping the head. You can, if you were, I don't know, if you're concerned about your hair or your hijab, but you don't have to wipe the hair. So let's say you had, I don't know, Indian Pakistani hair where it's so long and beautiful, at least in the old days, that's what they used to do. Right now, I guess Indians, they kind of changed in how their obsession with hair is. But at the time, they basically used to have these really long braids. You don't have to include your braids, okay, or your long ponytail. We're speaking about wiping the head, not the hair.
Yeah, that I understood. I meant more like when it's, like how when you tie your hair, like if you wipe from the elastic forward, like your hair that is attached to your head can like go mess up, like they can go like, in the air, like literally, like they can spike.
No, dear, you're okay. You're not starting from all the way the back. You can, this is not an issue of being that precise. Okay. So even if you started a little above the ponytail, you basically your wudu is still fine.
Okay, so you wipe from the front to the back, and then
So front to the back,
front
and
to
then
the back,
right. So front to the back,
and that's it.
and that's it.
Okay.
Not too hard.
No.
Okay. Sister Samira, go ahead, dear.
Assalamu alaikum. A couple of questions. One popped up as the sister Maryam was talking. So with the head, we wipe from the front to the back and back to the front, right? Or
So
anything?
this is a considerable opinion. So I'm trying to make it as easy as I can. And I'm basically including those opinions that I would say made it easier. So this is a considerable opinion. there is another opinion, front, back, and then back and front again.
Okay. And based on the fact that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the Sahabas used to wipe over the imamas, we are able to do masa over our hijab, right?
You are allowed to do masah over your hijab if it is basically worn on wudu. Number two, that it is muhannaka. In other words, it basically covers the chin area as well. And it's hard for you to remove it, or it doesn't have to be hard, meaning, some sisters' hijab might actually take 15 minutes to do, or maybe 10 minutes to just get all those pins and all of that. So in that situation, certainly you can wipe over the hijab.
But sometimes it's more of a public area and there are men around, and so you have to do it.
Okay, well, yeah, that's a considerable opinion.
Or if we could just take our hands and just put it under the hijab and wipe just the front of the head, is that sufficient?
That's a considerable opinion as well, but if there are men around, it's not just your head that's going to be uncovering then, because you would definitely need to wash your hands. If you're washing your arms, there are men around.
Right.
Right?
Yeah, well, yeah.
That
I'm just
happened to
thinking,
me when I was in Damascus. Like we were in Masjid al-Amawi, and all they had was a place in the middle where they make wudu, and I was like, "Where's the bathroom?" And so I had to make tayyamum.
There weren't any female bathrooms?
I don't know. My sister-in-law didn't know, and I didn't know what to do. So,
I'm sure there are female bathrooms. Noura.
but inshallah, it was accepted because I didn't know.
but this is a good question. So should one do tayammum at this point or do wudu?
Sorry, what was the question? I was coughing.
Sister Noura, she just mentioned that she ended up doing tayammum because there were men around, and so she didn't want to expose her body parts and all. So is that right when you're right there in
Well,
front of
what
the
I
tap?
would do if I were her, I'd grab a bottle of water and fill a bottle of water. It doesn't have to be a
Should
big
I make
bottle.
up that salah then?
I mean, that would be a good idea,
Okay,
but
but it's not required.
yeah, because
Okay.
the timing of it had passed. But
Khalas, I'll make it
yeah.
up.
But what was I saying? So if I were her, I would have grabbed a bottle of water and basically filled it up, and I don't know, just found a different corner and just basically done my wudu. But I'm sure there is a women's bathroom. In India and probably Pakistan, you might not find a place designated for women, but in Damascus, I'd be surprised that there isn't a women's bathroom. I'm pretty sure there is one.
Well, especially now with this new good government, alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah. Well, I don't necessarily think it's just this government, but I would say throughout history there was a place designated for women's basically usage.
Sometimes it's really far away, and so it's hard to get to. So I'm just thinking of
Well, you
myself, and
consider that every single step that you take is basically increasing your ajr.
also sometimes it's very close to Salah time, Sheikha, and so you don't have time. I'm thinking of myself when I was in the Qibli Masjid, and so I did wudu right in front where the taps are, because it was so close to Salah time, I'd broken my wudu.
In which masjid?
Qibli in Aqsa.
So in Masjid al-Aqsa, they actually have almost two places for wudu.
And not just that, but tahara comes before the salah.
Right. And plus, if you were to get, like I said, a bottle of water and there are those trees since you were in the Qibli, or there's actually an area right next to al-Masjid al-Aqsa al-Qibli, right on the side. It doesn't, it may not seem like there's anything there, but there's a little wall and there are all these taps there. You could actually do that, and or go to the Marwani area and you can get a bottle of water and just in that area, just make your wudu there.
Well, I think I did it in the area where you were talking about the walls. So the men are there, but they
Right,
can
there
barely
you go.
see you. They can't
Yeah,
see you really.
yeah. Maryam
I
finally got to her question. Maryam, what did you want to say?
It was relating to today, alhamdulillah, but I don't think we touched it, or maybe we did, I don't know, I can't remember. I've heard some times ago, not in this halaqah, but in another one, about the fact that if you have najasa on yourself during salah and that you forgot about it, and then you remember that you have, or you do it like just out of laziness, like you don't wash it out. I just wanted to revise that because I can't remember like if you're supposed to go out of salah and then like wash it, or if you continue your salah, or yeah, if you don't mind.
Maryam, I'm not sure I understood what you were saying. Do it again,
Okay,
please.
yeah. So I've heard before that if you have najasa on yourself, like on your clothes, let's say like we said, urine of the child, either if you forgot, like you continue your salah, like if you notice that you've had najasa and you forgot before starting the salah, that you understand what I'm saying?
Okay. So if you have najasa and you forgot that you had najasa or any impurity and you went for salah, but later on you remembered that there was najasa that you forgot to wash, then you would have to redo your prayer. Okay? Because that prayer is invalid.
Okay, barakallah fiki.
وإياكم. All right. And it can happen. For example, sister, she basically can forget that she had her period and actually pray while she was on her period. She forgot that she was on her period. Can it happen? It can happen. And I'm sure it happened to all of you once at least. Okay. Who else? Do we have another question here? Maryam, did you want to say something else, dear?
No, I'm gonna lower it now, thank you.
Dr. Aisha,
Okay.
this class was easy. Bring
Yeah,
hada.
it was easy. It was really
So
easy.
basic for a Somali. Inshallah, the
Yeah,
next one will be hada.
Sheikh
Well,
Aisha, I
you
have one
can
more
put those questions,
I
right?
just realized
I did.
I just realized my kids put a picture, say challenge me if you can, and that's what I'm trying to say. Subhanallah. That picture's
So
that
here's a question, and this is, let's see, Layla Ali, if your child wears a pull-up at night and puts their hand inside their pajamas, then touches you with the hand while sleeping next to you, should you shower and change your sheet? So in general, if basically, you would see, was the baby what was this child basically all dry or not? Okay. So if they were all dry, and that means, if they were all dry, that means you would consider that their hands were dry too. Okay. That means it wasn't najis. Okay. But if, let's say it was full of urine and you smell their hand, it was full of urine and possibly even other substances too, and you smell the area, something was contaminated, then definitely wash all those, basically all those, I guess, blanket and your bed clothes and all of that stuff, and the stuff that you have on your bed, and just wash it. Do you have to wash the actual blanket? You don't have to wash the actual blanket. I hope you don't have just the blanket. I hope you have, those, the covering. What do they call those? Bed sheets and
What about the dog slobber in a blanket?
Well, fair enough. That's what we were talking about, Nora. Differences of opinions on whether you have to do the 7 rule or not on a blanket, for example.
Ah, oh my God.
I know.
Yeah.
Just imagine that, you know.
I just need to hire like a cleaning crew to come and then
Oh,
put everything in the dirt.
Well,
everything.
the
I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
No, the preponderant, Nora, is that just stick it in the washing machine and that's it. No need to do the 7 rule on blankets.
So would I
Alhamdulillah.
would I
Alhamdulillah.
need to take a shower or just the cleaning the blankets?
You don't need to take a shower because did you smell any urine on the kids' hands or anything like that?
Yeah, at times. Not all
At
the
times?
time. Yeah.
So, and you're worried that he probably, touched your hand and touched you and all of that?
Yeah.
So if you are capable of knowing which area he touched and you just wash that, well, then just wash that area, okay? And no need to take a shower. But if, you're disgusted and you want to take a shower, that'll probably be my recommendation.
Yeah. I was in Umrah this Ramadan and I seen people like make wudu at the Zamzam areas, like the containers.
That's
It was
actually not right. I mean, I think they even have signs, do not make wudu here.
Mhm.
That's not right to make those at those containers. And there are like in every single door, and in fact they have a lot of wudu areas, so no need to actually do it in those containers.
Yeah, I was just because earlier we were just making comments, people making wudu other areas, but
No,
I
that's actually
agree.
not right.
There's wudu area even in the women's section. There's not a bathroom, but there's a wudu section.
Yeah.
And I think it's just timing and people just trying to go really quickly, not considering the workers
Yeah,
having to
not
clean that out.
right. I mean, and contaminating the
Yeah,
place. I mean, you're going to have water splashing on the,
safety. Yeah.
place where there's people, it's basically in a place of traffic. Sorry, but you're not getting hasanat for that.
Sheikh Aisha, I have a question for you, please.
Go ahead, dear.
In Morocco, I saw that they have a rock in the masjid, and they have lots of them everywhere. And I had asked, and they said that it's because someone is in prayer and it's so close to prayer, and the wudu breaks, then they do tayammum, although they are in the masjid and there is a wudu area there. Is that right?
So in terms of Morocco itself, I don't really know the whole idea, but if they said that it was tayammum, the possibility of tayammum, you want to keep in mind, oh my God, you want to keep in mind that that area basically, is a desert area, and they would get a lot of people coming from distances, etc. So not always was water available, and then it becomes a culture to basically do the architecture in that way. So sometimes people would just pass it on from generation to a generation, that it becomes part of the architecture. Okay. So just like, for example, you would see it was part of the architecture to have a small opening in the wall, and that was more for drinking water, etc. But right now that's not necessary, because at the time they needed to put like a jug there, etc. But right now it's not necessary, because they would basically have taps,
But
and it's a different system. So perhaps at the time maybe they had it available, but it's kind of strange. I mean, why do you have to put a rock when the person, if soil is that available, why put a rock when the person can just go outside the masjid and basically do tayammum there? So I don't know about their architecture and the wisdom behind it. I have no idea.
It was for convenience, so that, if the prayer is about to start and you're going to maybe miss a couple of rakats or whatever, you have rocks. They're there in the women's areas, in the areas, so you can quickly do tayammum just before prayers. And
Quite right. That's quite strange. You know,
But don't
if
forget that the Prophet ﷺ, he didn't want people rushing to the salah, right?
well, the other thing is, Noura, let's say the jama'ah started and you don't have wudu yet. Are you going to make tayammum when water is available? The answer is no.
Right.
To follow along with the jama'ah, you can't say, I'll just make tayammum just so that
Oh,
I
because
won't.
your salah would be affecting everybody's salah.
Well, absolutely.
yeah,
If there's water, in other words, basically water available, then tahara is a prerequisite, even if you miss jama'ah. Even
also
if
you
you
could
miss
even
jama'ah. So to think that, oh, I'm going to miss jama'ah if I were to go make my wudu. No, it's okay. Miss your jama'ah and go make wudu since it's available.
Nura said salah affects other people's salah. If I pray jama'ah and my wudu affects other people's salah.
Yes. Yes, we mentioned that one. The Prophet ﷺ, he was praying Salat al-Fajr and reading Surah al-Rum, and the Prophet ﷺ had said that the clarity basically in reciting the ayat was basically becoming hard on him because some people were not perfecting their wudu. That's what the Prophet ﷺ had said. Some people were not perfecting their wudu, and because they weren't perfecting their wudu, it wasn't just affecting them individually, but it was affecting the people that were around them.
Jazakallah khair.
All right.
can I ask
Ustaz
one more?
What
go
was
ahead.
that? Wait, sorry. Was that related to anything with when the Prophet ﷺ said save your elbows from the fire?
No, it wasn't related to it. That was a
It
different
wasn't.
event.
Okay. Okay, Jazakallah
Wasn't
khair.
related to it. It was a different event. It wasn't the elbows, Noura. وَيْلٌ لِلْأَعْقَابِ مِنَ النَّارِ. It wasn't talking about the elbows. Al-a'qab are basically the heels.
Ah, okay.
Not elbows. Okay, so Ustaza Umayya, go ahead, dear.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. For tayammum, does sands work same like the soil? And the soil supposed to be dry, or if it's mud, can work for
Okay.
tayammum? Thank you.
So number one is, according to the Shafi'i especially, Shafi'is were, let's say, a lot more inclusive. So that's why they included rocks, that's why they included soil, sand, pebbles, etc. Okay. Other scholars, some scholars considered that no, it's only soil and therefore cannot be something else. As for mud, yes, it can be included, but do you really want to mud yourself to clean yourself?
But
All right.
tayammum is only for face and hands.
It's only for face and hands, but do you really want to mud yourself?
No, but in case.
Okay. In case, well, sure.
Work.
It can work. Yes, it can.
Okay. Jazakallah khair.
وإياكم. All right, so this is it. سبحانك اللهم بحمدك نستغفرك ونتوب إليك. This is every Sunday and is it Friday or Saturday, Noura? So it would be you guys' Friday. And
No,
my
it's our Sunday, your Monday, right?
Yes.
Wait, what is today? Yeah.
No.
I never know what
today-
today is because I'm in everybody's time zone.
Okay, good job. So tomorrow, inshallah, the timing at 8:30. 8:30? No, it's supposed to be at 9. When are we starting?
No, Dr. Aisha, that's why I'm late in class, because you came at 7:20 today. So it's not 8 Central Standard Time, it's 8 Eastern, Central is 7. We're 1 hour behind.
So is that
For
good news or
Central.
bad news?
But Minnesota time, it's
No, because if you look on the website, it says 7:30.
Okay,
No,
right.
it used to be 8 o'clock. Did you change it?
Well, we just, you know how we always have a little social time in the beginning.
you have Dr. Samia class at 7.
What?
Dr. Samia
On
class.
Sunday?
Monday.
Yeah, Monday, but that we're talking about Sunday, اليوم Sunday.
Yeah, but talking about tomorrow or today. Tafsir.
Oh, tafsir. Okay.
Yeah.
You want me to
We
start
can't
at
conflict
9
those.
then?
We can't.
Right. So
At
you want me to
9,
start
good.
at 9, which is,
Minnesota.
well,
8 my time.
8 your time.
Yes.
Okay.
Minnesota.
Okay.
Stable.
All right, now write this down, Dr. Aisha, please.
Yeah, so it's going to be 9 a.m. my time, right? Not 8.
Whatever time you wake up, Habibti, we're in America. We cannot leave America with the time. Your
All
time
right,
is so hard to
inshallah.
tell, you know. So
we'll be
whatever
in,
time you come in,
You're
all the times.
you're on the same, you're 12 hours from my time zone, right? And Minnesota is an hour behind.
Yes.
So
right, but I'm seeing people from Minnesota, Oklahoma, and in Canada, so I'm in,
okay.
let's see how many
You let's just stick with DC because, you know,
DC
or Minnesota.
Okay, all right. So this is it. Inshallah, then tomorrow we'll do the tafsir and lots of details in tafsir. Maybe we could just give you a sneak peek on what we're doing, right, in tafsir. And